morning, everyone. Thank you for having us here. And we're going to talk a little bit about, nChain is a blockchain company. And very sort of interestingly, I'm not going to talk a lot about blockchain, but more about the fact that how technology, emerging technology, and what it means in Web3 and what it means with digital identity. Digital identity is a hot topic in the UK amongst many other countries. I myself am an identity person. I was previously a program advisor for the World Economic Forum for digital identity for 5 years, and before I joined nChain. And part of the whole word around Web3. What is Web3? What does it even mean? It's very buzzword of the moment. Probably that means different thing to different people. And in our view, the world of what Web2, what it is today, basically, companies, platforms taking our data and monetizing it, third parties taking control of our data, our access, and using us as ways of actually, we are the commodity. In today's world, we are the commodity. We are the things that get. We're the products as individuals. Whether it's our pictures, our data, our way of life, is being made money out of by other companies and the social media platforms, so on and so forth. And our buying habits, the way that I say pay my colleagues, pay my friends, that's all being monetized by other people. Well, what if in the Web3 world, we change that around? What if rather than me being the cabbage, so to speak, as a commodity, what if in the Web3 world, with the enablement of emerging technology, we can change that around so that when I shop, and not only am I spending my money to get, say, a dress, but my data that goes to a shop, because they want my data. Right now, I have to sign all these agreements. They want my data. Well, you better pay for my data. If you want more of my data, then pay for it. If you want more of how my habits are, then I should be able to get a share of it rather than the other way around. And with that, in the Web3 world, it's also about pure digitalization. Today, many of what we do is still very paper loaded, basically. For example, when we go past passport control, we still have to find bits of passports, bits of paper. When we have to sign for leases of your flat, when you rent, when you do anything that requires some form of legal thing, you have to sign pieces of paper. Yes, you have now PDF and DocuSign and that, but there is no way of knowing whether it's really me who signed it, the computer who signed it, my dog who signed it, and there's no way of telling. And how do you know that it's really done and this is legally accepted now because of COVID? And because of COVID, many of these habits have changed. And many of the younger generation, if you say to them, this piece of paper needs to be notarized, they're not even heard of what is a notary public. I'm old, so most I'm of the generations that still knows. But for example, when I lived in the US for a little bit, I had to take my pictures, like the UK, you have to sign that this is the true likeness of you and all of that, and then have to go to a bank manager and say, or someone of trusted position from a regulated entity, that this is really I'm who I say I am. Really? In this day and age, that you can do almost everything on your phone and with video calls and so on and so forth. Why do we still have all of this? And why is this still so difficult to verify who you are, who you say you are, with all this technology around us? And we all can use all of that today. If we, as individuals, can use all of that today on a daily basis, why do organizations, why have they not caught up with some of this? So in the way we think of Web3, I think the aspects of controlling our own data, our own ourselves retaking back control around our own commodity, so to speak, enabling our own privacy, and also the fact that to make life easier, so that we're not just digitalizing a paper process, but making it more digitally native, and also making it more user-friendly to the elderly, to people who are disabled, to other people who find it less accessible, because currently there's too many choices. It's hard, to even navigate some of the basic. It's hard, and for people who are visually impaired, for example, it's incredibly hard. So what does this mean? that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, we are in crypto winter right now, but digital assets, regardless of crypto, regardless of that, assets are being digitalized every day. Whether it's for sort of trading between organizations, but whether it's for payments, all our payments today is electronic. But does that mean that it needs to be tokenized? Does it need to be in the way of trading? Why? What difference does it make? Well, the interesting bit, and really interesting bit, there are countries that have their network, payments network, switched off because they're not credit worthy or threatened to be switched off. Imagine you have a whole country that says, I pay by, I don't carry cash anymore since COVID. Like probably many of you here. I walk around with my phone and keys, that's all I have. And thinking through that, well, imagine tomorrow, Visa, MasterCard cut the whole country off because we are no longer credit worthy and threatened to be cut off and paid a lot more money. And thinking of that, that's why there's a level of asset tokenization. And it's not just for retail payments, but also when we have to trade buildings, houses, big corporate payments, amount of paperwork that is involved. I think this is why there is it's a big drive towards asset tokenization. And there's too many zeros for me to count, but about 5 to 10% of the world's assets will be tokenized. And that's very much a lot of the financial services colleagues here will know that this is very much the trend. And already, sort of the Web3 type, blockchain type technology is already here in production today. When I first started, was it 8 years ago? So that was very early days. I have to explain it in a very different manner. Today, most people know what it is. So bringing back to why am I talking about digital assets 1 minute, identity another minute, Web3 the third minute? Well, in a world where you think you need to verify your identity in order to do a transaction, in a digital transaction, you need some kind of digital assets, and in a way you need to build trust inside this pure digital and evolved environment where you bring control back to nChain. Our position is that digital identity, digital assets, and the way to verify all of these and build the trust network of all of this, these are fundamental pillars of what will make Web3. Today, we have the internet of Web2. What does that mean? Well, you need internet, you need network, you need connectivity. You need some form of computer screen. You need a way to make digital payments for e-commerce. So you have the likes of PayPal. You need to search for information. Google. In the next generation, these are the things that we need as we build for the future. Ability to control your own data, therefore digital identity. Ability to trust that data, therefore some form of trust framework that the UK is building. And ability to deal with assets in a digital manner and not just digitalizing paper. So all of this, what it means is that really, where's the driving change? Part of it is the growth of the digital economy. Many governments globally talk about this a lot because it's where the real next generation of growth is. Changing consumer expectations. And this is a huge drive. Look at how COVID changed our behavior. And that will continue. That on the way up here, colleagues and I were talking about, well, the fact is, today we need flexibility in the way we work. 3-4 years ago, that would be insane to even think about. Today, it's expected. So how consumer behaves, organization needs to change in terms of supporting that. Growing adoption of Web3 use cases. What does it mean? Things like gaming. Most of you that have children, look at them not even playing the game. They're watching somebody else play the game. To me, it's shocking, but that's what they do. And how do they then interact? Well, why is it value? We watch TV, they watch people playing a game, and they pay using real money to pay for some stuff in a game that is pure digital. It doesn't even exist in real life. But to them, they will pay money for it. And all of a sudden, your credit card is used. So that kind of thing and that kind of what does that consumer behavior means in the future. You can see here in the map, there's lots of the different digital identity projects, different digital asset projects, how the two things, digital assets, Web3 projects, are mapped to identity. And this is important because when we built the internet, Sir Tim Berners-Lee said, one of the things they forgot is the identity layer. They had the internet, there's no way of verifying identities. And that's where I think as we evolve, this is more important. It doesn't mean that in everything I do, I should be able to say I'm who I am. There are cases when I want to be my dog, or want to be someone else and have an avatar, because if I'm playing a game, it's nobody's business. If I'm shopping for something that I don't want other people to know, that's also my business. I shouldn't have to share that. But for trusted transaction that can be done quickly, then I should, that requires trust. We should increase the level of ease with which we do business. And therefore, increasing the aspects to address things like data protection, ownership of data, all of these things culminate to how we combine assets and identity. There are already a number of projects today that looks at combining some of this. JP Morgan, years ago, myself did some of these work around combining identity and digital assets together. For those of you that are familiar with crypto assets, is any form of digital assets, that wallet process is one of the most painful user experience. Similarly, if you want to do digital identity, you're going to have multiple different wallets. I don't have multiple handbags when I walk around. I'm sure you gentlemen also don't have multiple wallets staking around. Why can't it be the same? In a phone and digital environments, you don't want multiple wallets holding multiple things that needs to link to multiple things. Imagine today we already struggle with remembering a lot of passwords. Imagine if you have to remember multiple crypto type wallets environment for your identity for different types of transaction. It's awful. So thinking of that, whether there is for retail payments, all the way to CBDCs, some of the big topics that are out there today, and digital identity from a perspective of end user, for banking purposes, for insurance, doing KYC, AML, all of this is a pain, not just for individuals, but for companies. Every single quarter, the amount of paperwork that you got to submit, all of that, yes, it's being digitalized, but it's not easy, and there's a lot of fat finger issues, as we all know. And thinking of, a lot of these kind of regulations already coming in. In UK, I helped to form the first beta of the UK Identity Trust Framework. Similarly, in Europe, the EIS2 is coming out very shortly. It's already in sandbox environment. There are similar rules in digital assets and regulations coming on board, but they are not talked about together today. It's going back to my handbag issue. I don't want to carry 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So how do we make sure that as organizations, as you think about digitalization of your assets, you also think about digitalization of your identity and trust, and not leave one thing without the other, because it's going to come together. And it's the only way. Because imagine you do a payments. You have to verify your identity. And if those things don't work together, you end up with silos. And how is it any better than the tech today? It's not. You're going to go through horrible processes, and we are actually building new technology with same crappy processes. So that's one of the things worth bearing in mind. So what is identity? We all have passports, and some of the digital ones are coming. I did previous in my old role, when I was working with the World Economic Forum, we did a project on one of the first cross-border digital identities. And thinking through why are things that are, some of the things that are important, it's not just identity for individuals, but identity also for organizations, companies. How do we submit taxes? Most of what on company, for example, companies' house, other governments, also the data is completely out of date. It's not verified who they say they are. Some countries, they don't really do address checks. They don't really do name checks. It's the directors are only required to submit information every so often. So a lot of this business data can also be out of date. There will be identity of devices, of IoT devices. How do we know it's really the fridge or the tractor making the right decisions for the company? Because all of that automation is going to imagine the accountability that needs to be changed across the board. So all of that, there's identity of organizations submitting carbon credits, so on and so forth. I have a pattern on identity of animals. Think of today, many of you probably travel. We've Brexited, so our pet passports are no longer valid across Europe. So now you have to have stacks of paper, stacks of stuff. Think of it, how much easier it would be if it's on your phone and all your pet records is right there and you just go. And so you don't have to worry about quarantine, days and days worth of going to the vet, doing this, doing that, and the other. So all of that is a simple use case, actually. But people don't think it's, oh, it's easier because it's a piece of paper. Well, it's not. Because the next generation will not have time to go and do that, and we will not have the attention span. And the way we interact are different. We expect different interaction. So all of that I've sort of highlighted why is it important, and I think it's an easy topic to relate to why is identity important. And some of the key activities, I mentioned, gaming, metaverse. Gaming is huge. In that sense, because that indicates how people will act in the future because of their captured audience. How will they be using identity? Well, millions, and these gaming companies are some of the biggest brands in the world now, and will be in the future. What that means, how do they port their assets, things that I may not understand, this weapon in a game to port it to a different game, that's an asset. I might think it's silly, but for a lot of the children out there, that's a real thing. And they want it, and they want to take it along. What if one game can allow you to take different assets across the other? That's a whole different mindset of change, and therefore, how do you deal with the organization of that digital asset, take it outside of the walled gardens that they live in today? So therefore, you need identity, that asset really belongs to me. How do I then trade that asset? How do I make sure that I get money back for my asset in whichever form that the currency is? Similarly, I know that whether it's the metaverse, different ID, this will evolve. And thinking of how do I then protect my identity in a metaverse? How do I ensure that I am getting money's worth for my information, not just having organizations make money off me? And in many countries, digital identity programs are being looked at, and whether it's, I mentioned Philippines because it's an organized government that we're working with. Lots and lots of countries today are already investing a lot. And some of the European countries are actually slower than developing countries. So as UK organizations, it's worth thinking about. Actually, there is a big leap in other outside of UK, Europe, and the US, because they're going to move faster because they have an advantage of less red tape, for example. So the things that are worth thinking about around digital assets and identity, why do we need to think about them together? Well, they need each other to exist. Identity, a little bit of, if you imagine, if your passport isn't accepted everywhere, why would you bring it out? If your Visa, MasterCard isn't accepted everywhere, you don't need to take it out. You can just leave it at home because it's like money. If it's not accepted everywhere, why bother? Then don't. There's no use for it. It's just pieces of paper. So, or pieces of plastic, whatever it is. In the world where digital sovereignty is a relatively new concept, but more and more important looking at the world politics today. These are things, when you run out, if your house is on fire, the things that you're probably going to want to take is your ID, some way of verifying your ID, and probably some asset, because you need life continuity or business continuity. So that aspects of supporting the government, supporting your organization, your household, yourself, of sovereignty in a digital space where there is no boundaries, no borders. That aspects of digital sovereignty in a digital world is much harder. So these are some of the tools. Understanding how digital assets work, digital identity work, will help governments to form better sense of digital sovereignty. How do they protect their people? How do they protect their assets? How do they protect value? And ensure economic growth stays in the country. That's one. Two is the Web3 aspects of what does this mean. As I mentioned earlier when I started, is really the fundamental pillar of where we go. So of Web3 with identity and assets. Regulations are slow, and I think organizations need to get ahead of it and drive some of the adoption of this. And then similarly, of cross-border efficiency, we are in a world today where everything is cross-bordered, whether we like it or not. And the efficiencies need to take place. It's just not acceptable to have payment clearance taking 5, 6 days before the payment gets there. It's insane if when Amazon can ship me stuff from the US in 2 days. So, you kind of think, really? It is that slow to do anything? But all of this Web3, new technology adoption, identity assets cannot exist without each other. And the way for greater adoption, faster economic growth, and how do you transform your organization, both are needed to help you to transform your organization or your government. And how do those things need to work in your organization for the future, as you go into the future, are things that needs to be thought about. And I would say that some of it is Web3 infrastructure today. All of this is relatively one-sided and is siloed. Yeah, so in many ways, there's a lot of private blockchain, permissioned ecosystems. And how is that any different? It's maybe slightly bigger than our own perimeter of IT, but it's not that different. There's no benefits of Web3 then. You can't get the benefits of data sharing if you don't open it up. But our policies, organization policies, government policies, don't support data sharing. Don't provide the security, the thinking, the strategy around how do you share, what types of data do you share, what controls do you need, who can share, who can't share, how do you make sure the counterparty is real? All of those needs to be thought about. It's all great and good having great blockchain technology, but if there's no policies, procedures, thinking, process, strategy around it, it's a bit pointless, because then people are too scared to share. A little bit like cloud when it first started. No, but everybody was too scared of public cloud. Now it's like, well, why, all of those controls are built in, and even, US federal government have FedRAMP on AWS. And it's that kind of building the trust, but it's also organization building the strategy and policy. Similarly, thinking of, things like blockchain infrastructure, wallets, all of that, it's multi-level. It's not one. It's not just, everything goes on blockchain. No, it doesn't work like that. And thinking and embracing that, understanding that fundamentally some of our current IT stack, our legacy system, might have to adapt, but it's not about rip and replace. The rip and replace fundamentally doesn't work. And it's about how do you augment and using these new technologies with what exists today. Standards are something very, very important, and of course, privacy, security needs to be assumed. And some of the the new stuff coming with zero-knowledge proof around blockchain and Web3 is really, truly where the value really, really lies. I can disclose my information without my name, date of birth, all of that information. They just need to know, are you over 18? Good to go. Are you that person? Good to go. They don't need to know your address. Things like medication. I hate going into a chemist and they ask you, what is your address? Can you verify your postcode? This and that. 20 people behind me. I don't really want them to know what medication I'm on, what diseases I have, and all of that. It's not their problem. So it's things like this that, what if they just say, scan this, are you this? Yes, go. No one needs to know what the long list of medication and problems I have. Wallets I already touched on. And then the role of identity I touched on, I showed some of the interesting projects that are going on around wallets, around how this could work, why does the assets and identity need to work together. And many examples of projects out there today. I mentioned gaming quite a bit. It's coming. This is the future. In-game digital assets will need some form of identity to make it work together. The interoperability of in-game assets is going to be a thing. So how do organizations, think of your organization where you manage buildings, just documenting those assets digitally, and how do you move them around from a corporate use case? Also interesting. For training, when you have a global workforce, how do you, and verifying that those are the really people who work for you and be able to employ anywhere. Things like the creator economy, of course. For example, today I can watch Netflix, and sometimes I spend about 5 minutes watching and think, oh my God, this is terrible. Maybe I only want to pay for those 5 minutes. I don't want to pay a monthly subscription. Similarly, if someone wrote a song, they should be able to get paid for their content. And if someone gets paid every 5 seconds, 5 minutes, whatever, that's the subscription that should go to them. and the ability to provide micropayments, nanopayments for consumers so that I don't have to pay for the entire series of Netflix that is killing my brain, and only pay for 5 seconds. Be much better for me, not so great for Netflix, but better for me, and also use your money to vote and say this is good content, this is bad content, and the producers would then know what they should be producing in terms of better data availability also. And things like fractional ownership, this is a bit like a timeshare, but not being locked into a room with estate agents, Think of not just for property where it exists today, like timeshare, but think of other types of assets, whether it's a liquid asset like NFTs, other real estates, but secondary market, rent a handbag, but now similar ideas, whether it's a watch, whether it's a case of wine where you only own one bit, and assets that don't need to move around. That aspects of thinking of fractional ownership is where things like digital assets can enable you to divide all of that for things that are not divisible physically. And it lowers barrier to entry. Imagine you want to invest in large funds. You can't do that today because it's too difficult. The entry point is like 200 grand. But what if we all pull together for fractional bits and we can then invest together and it's better for all our future because not everyone has 200 grand in their pocket. So different ideas. At sort of nChain, we are a blockchain company primarily. We do, we're one of the companies that with lots and lots of IP and lots of patents. And we're based here in the UK and in Slovenia. A little bit of what we do is around identity is one of our products, clearly my passion, document signing, a lot of, and also helping organizations with the utilization and moving onto the Web3 platforms and what this means with different products and solutions. And whilst, I said earlier that whilst the internet was created without an identity layer, in Web3, a trusted identity, an asset, but the key word here is trust, will both be required in order for us to benefit from what it means. And if we don't, as organization, if we don't change quickly enough, then there will be others who will consume us. So, thank you. Any questions? Sure.
Hi there. One thing I thought was perhaps not talked to in the presentation was the inherent sort of conflict or tension between state and identity. You mentioned Philippines as being low red tape, but it's also knocking on the lowest third of corrupt countries in the world. It's considered quite corrupt at the moment. It's going in a direction. You talk to South America, Middle America, Central America, Africa. Lots of these countries are not places where particularly in the short term, the in-situ government might be trusted with your identity. You talk a lot of owning our identity, and yet, even in the UK, we see the online safety bill attempts to crack open encryption. How do you sort of balance that conflict, or what are your thoughts?
I think actually EIDAS, the UK Digital Identity Framework, also the are all Singapore, for example, all have major significant digital identity programs. UK is probably a little bit behind because of exactly the reasons you mentioned. Privacy must be embedded in part of these identity programs. And that's why today, if you look at the technology, it's heavily centralized based, platform based technology. And part of the issue is we can't control the data. I can't control, let's say, for example, how I spend my money and how I pay my taxes should never be able to see each other. Because really it's not somebody else's worry, especially with digital assets in play. And perhaps for health data, it shouldn't all be, it could be segregated from immigration data, for example. So those are and to address some of those concerns is really around using and designing systems with the right with the right framework in place, not just from a technical perspective, but the entire system end-to-end, legal, redress capabilities and transparency. So, for example, in the EU, in Belgium particularly, there's when the government first started issuing identities, more electronic identities rather than pure digital, they have a website that each government employee who have access to your data, you can see it. And you can request for data, and it's all there. which government departments access your data. And it's fully live. It's been around for a while. And whilst it exists, for the first week, probably a lot of people looked at it. Yeah. After a couple of weeks, no one looked at it. It's still there. It runs and it's live. And the reason is building of trust and transparency. I think a lot of, quite rightly so, a lot of the what you said, a lot of the other sort of emerging countries, there's a lot more work to do, and there's a lot of fear, and quite rightly so, because one of my former clients is the United Nations, and protection of data and sensitive data, for refugees, for people of concerns, that's critical. And for people who may be, people who are fleeing, who may be victims of crime, victims of abuse, so on and so forth. Those are things that need to be protected. I think the beauty is that what is available today in terms of technology, things that I just mentioned, like zero knowledge proofs, those aspects, you can still enable for you to use your identity without the trust of that identity, without actually reviewing any of the information. And that's the clever bit of the technology where it comes in. Of course, that requires people who know how to actually build those systems, the expertise of using that technology in a wise way, requires countries to have laws and that formulate the trust, and also the people who build the system to not to abuse the tech, and the people who own the system to not abuse it, and also requires a lot of consumer education. For some of you that might remember when the UK switched to chip and pin, a long time ago, yeah. But in those days, do not share your pin, do not share your pin, do not share your pin. Same with online banking. It was a monumental amount of training for consumers, a bit like COVID, actually. That aspects of training and getting the end users to think about, hey, you don't do this, you don't do this. If they do, and that is important. For responsible government, that's what they should be doing. And that's what organizations should urge governments to do. Sure.
It's not really a question, just one discussion. First thing is very good presentation.
Thank you.
What I think is that the digital identity, although is a layer above everything else, currently what we see for a digital identity and digital assets in the payments of it, you would need a card. The card would need a bank account. The bank account would need to be, when it's open, verified. How it's verified? You will have to go in person, show your identity, everything. So it's not starting there. It's starting here at where you have to physically verify. And then you go that up the chain. So I think in digital identity, if it doesn't start there, it will still keep on going back. And you would not be able to break that chain. So do you see something that's changing?
Yes, I think, as I said, I think it's massively changing. The UK, for example, already has a large working group in this space with the government supporting the working group. Lots of private sector initiatives, especially banks, are already doing this. And lots of other governments, EU, and others are already doing this. And some of it is not just banks, some of it is things like university education. Education and employment is a massive space. Like I'm an alum of Oxford University. I don't know, every time I change a job, they have to call administration. Yeah, did this person really go to this? At my university, a degree hasn't changed for 20 plus years. It's not going to change for another 20 plus years, however many times I may change roles or need to apply for a visa. Those are the kind of things that even if it's not coming from top down, from a government legislation perspective, those are the kind of things that private sector can look to change between them. Of course, it requires cooperations between organizations, for example, employment, background checking with university or with training certification. But those are the kind of groups that can actually work with governments and work with the right governments to help bring about some of that change. And government sometimes, I think, change requires adoption and use cases. Organizations also need to come to each other and say, hey, we all share this problem. We spent thousands vetting a person when actually it could be minutes. So we all have the common shared pain as organizations, and those are some of the things that requires enough of a voice to bring about change. Sure.
Yeah, I think we all have been on this digital journey for many years now. It's getting to the point where, as you say, digital identity is really key, right? My question here is, what about those who are still not able to get to digital, right? The International Telecom Union this year, 33% of the global population is still not connected. So, how are you guys able to solve that problem if that is your problem?
For nChain, it isn't an immediate thing because part of it is connectivity. And part of it is also, therefore, working with the mobile providers. And identity is a public good, fundamentally. It's, yes, the cost gets pushed down to consumers, but it is public good. So it is about working with the governments across sectors. It is not about monetary realization overall. That's why it has a massive social impact. That aspect of, it's not going to be overnight either. Nothing changes overnight. It will be a generation change, I think. The fact that there is a lot of people who still, as you say, that there is still a massive digital divide. And honestly, not everyone can use their phones to that degree, and not everyone has connectivity to that degree. So it will take time. So there are going to be lots of hybrid solution, offline solution, paired with cards. There are going to be many different flavors. But that will take time, but it's about getting onto that journey and moving it across.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bitcoin mining, Bitcoin wallet, blockchain, stablecoins, MetaNet, the evolution of money. Everybody is talking about Bitcoin today, but what exactly is it? Learn the basics from experts. Learn what Bitcoin is, how it works, and why it matters. Blockchain 101, your ultimate guide to the fundamentals of blockchain.